Hi, welcome to the Relume webinar, The Next Horizon of Agility. I'm Janelle Lanza. We have started the conversation by looking at the history of agility and the evolution of it in our last webinar, and you can find us on YouTube and research that show. And we believe that understanding the complicated current state, sometimes starting with where we've been and why we were there, is important. And today we're going to look forward a little more than we did in our last webinar, specifically the next horizon of agility. As I said, my name is Janelle Lanza, and I'm an executive coach. I'm also a organization change and product training Jane of all trades. And I'm a mom of 3 kids, and when I'm going out to a restaurant, I have a really hard time ordering because I want to know all the background ingredients, as I'm a carnivore and try to avoid seed oils and all that. So I do a lot of reading. Brandon, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Hello again, Brandon Linton, Enterprise Agility Coach, Organizational Development, Leadership Development, Development Edges, working more with culture to raise awareness and unlock unconventional action to keep organizations thriving in the VUCA Bonnie world. Based out of Detroit, and when I go to a restaurant, I'm usually the person with the disruptive children that earn a few looks or frowns from those dining around me. And next, I believe we've got 2 fine people named Dan, true to our agile and self-organizing nature. I invite either one of the Dans to go ahead and introduce themselves, please.
How about I go first, Dan? Because you've got the best cooking story at the end. I'm Dan McClure. I have been doing agile things for my entire career, which is really, really long time. The emergence of agile around 2000 began to sort of codify the things that a bunch of us were doing on our own. And I have since tried to look for ever bigger problems, messier, more complex things to go play agile in. I'm not really a coach, I'm more of an architect. And so when I walk into a restaurant, the first thing I look at is, oh, look at the flow of those people moving from front to back, and how do they manage the communications across this? And if my son's there, we both do that, and we're really a pain to be waited on.
Welcome.
Thanks for that, Mr. McClure.
Hey, I'm Dan Moody, and I actually am a trained chef. I went to culinary school after high school and worked in 5-star kitchens with haute cuisine, so super fancy French stuff. These days when I go out, I'm typically the solo diner at a fine dining restaurant, sitting there eating by myself and enjoying the food. So that's typically the person I am these days. I used to be the chef, the sort of orchestrator of the entire kitchen, who's the person that jumps in wherever you need to jump in to get stuff done, which is sort of what I do as a coach these days, working with people, is figure out where I can help people and jump in. I have a big focus on change through people, because I believe that people are the ones doing the work and they actually have to change, including leaders. And the only way to really have lasting change is to help the people change.
Thank you for that.
Welcome.
Yes, welcome. Okay, now that we've had some introductions of our extremely good-looking and smart guests, who at the end of the show will give you information on how to contact them, and they'll also share what's arising in their world as far as creative development and things they want to share with you. But for now, let's focus in on, what's next for agility. And so I just want to start the conversation with Mr. McClure. It's like, what do you think of when I ask you that? Like, what's next for agility? And maybe an easy way to start with that is like, what are you aware of that's out there in your experience?
So I think this is one of those cases where the question is asked in a slightly backwards way. we're all agile practitioners, right? And so it's very natural to ask, what's next for agility, because that's our world. We live in this world of, making things agile, etc. But I think when we really look at what drives change in agile, it's the change in the underlying problem. So if you think about, 1990, when system development life cycles and waterfall methodologies were being, put in place. These were not evil people who had bad methodologies at heart. They were people solving a problem. And the problem was, how do I build complicated business software that we know the details of and deliver it reliably? And that was good stuff. 2000 or so, now you get a new challenge that the software is beginning to look a little more squirrely. The internet's coming in, World Wide Web, new business functions. So we have Agile in response to that business problem. The thing didn't change because we decided to adopt Agile. It changed because we have a new business problem. 2007, the mobile phone comes in, we get yet another new business problem, the digital phone and the whole digital product era. And so that drives another generation of Agile. So, Janelle, I think what I would tend to say is, what's the new problem that we have to solve? And for me, that's that industries are being run over by the Mack trucks of Apple, Amazon, new startups, AI businesses, and as a result need to reinvent themselves. So the new problem, from my perspective, that's driving the next generation of Agile is this need to reinvent entire enterprises in a disruptive world. And there's going to have to be new forms of Agile to rise to that particular challenge.
Thank you. What are you seeing or feeling, Dan, Moody, about that? Or Moody, what do you think? What are you aware of?
I'll go that way. So I love that answer, and I think that what I see is I see that sort of evolution, and I think that you look at how we used to deliver software. We delivered on floppy disks, and it was very cost prohibitive to deliver, so people didn't deliver all the time. And when you get to the state of people have cell phones in their hands, updates happen over the air, and you can do them multiple times a day, how we deliver software could change. It doesn't mean that that's necessarily the right answer to deliver that frequently. There are cases where customers actually don't want to be delivered to that quickly because it messes up their processes depending on how you're delivering that software. And so I think part of it is looking and saying, what is it that the customer needs? And are we actually helping the company deliver in the way that is best for them? And that may be waterfall for some people. Mm-hmm. Like that may be a fine process. In a chat thread the other day, talking with people, there are some folks out there who are coaches who will say, like, I don't want to work with people who don't get it, or who aren't all in and want to move this way. And I said, look, there are some people who, we as a coaching group, there may be those of us who say, oh, we don't like SAFe. I don't want to get into framework wars, but they may say that, and some people will say, I don't want to work with anybody doing that. I say, look, there are people who might want to do that. Maybe there's people who want to do giant big bang transformations. That's all fine with me. Like, I could help them do it better. And I'm happy to do that. And so long answer to get to, when in this chat we were talking, I had talked about how there are coaches who help professional athletes or people getting to, like, someone who's getting to the level of a Tiger Woods or aspires to be there. And there are some people that make a great business out of doing that. Good for them. There's a lot more casual golfers who want help, and they just want to not suck when they go out and spend a couple hours with friends on the weekend. They need help too, and I'm okay to help them as well. There's a lot more of them. And so I think it's really just what are the companies, what are their goals, and how are we helping them achieve their goals? And if they want to try something that some in the industry might think is, dumb or stupid or a bad idea, maybe it's okay to help them and help them do it better than they otherwise would.
Yeah. Could I jump in though with a yes and on that? Because I think recognizing that organizations have different needs is hugely important. We didn't go through an evolution of Agile where one form of Agile was better than the next. We basically are seeing different tools for different needs. Hammers are not better than saws. Saws are not better than screwdrivers. They're different tools for different needs. I do think, though, that there's an opportunity here to basically convince somebody that you have a bigger problem, you have a bigger need, and
True.
then enter the door by saying, you've got this bigger need. Once you sort of buy into that idea of a bigger need, now let's talk about what the appropriate tool set is.
And not just the appropriate tool set, right? I think there's arguments that I'm seeing these days about appropriate approach. Like, do we start small and grow, or do we do everything all at once? And I could see cases for doing everything all at once, which I know is eschewed by some in the Agile industry. I point to Target as a sort of success story in that vein, right? I know people who worked at Target and they went all at once, and I would say largely successful. I don't know a lot of those, but I do think it's possible.
So if I can go off on just a little bit of a soapbox for all at once.
Yeah.
I think there's
Soapbox it.
different definitions of all at once. If we imagine an organization as having vertical functions, let me get my hands in the frame, vertical functions, like we're going to deliver toys to kids as Target or whatever, that's the function you have. And then there's horizontal functions, which might be everybody who's doing QA. There's, I think, a real need as we move into these bigger problem spaces, these more challenging problem spaces, to be working on those vertical connections. You can't do just one part of an entire reinvention of an ecosystem. You've got to bring all the pieces you need for that solution together. And so in some ways, even though all at once is really hard, and you probably don't want to do all at once across all of Target, you do need to have a mix of things that you bring together so that you've got a whole solution. So maybe whole solution at once.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, a client I've worked with recently, they decided to do a big bang transformation by changing their funding model. But there was no real structure or thought about how do we want it to look when we get to the other side. It was like, we're going to change the funding model. We're going to give you some high level theory about some mindset type stuff. And then, all right, you all understand it now, go out and do. That was a disaster, right? I will just admit that, like, it was very interesting to see. And from being on the inside of that, I think that if I were going to do some big bang thing, like before we start saying, let's pull out this solution, the thing is companies have all these systems in place that they built out over the years, right? All these different intricate systems, and it's a bit of a spaghetti mess. And before you start moving people around, in my view, if I were to do a big bang thing, I would first start with technical practices and getting things like CI/CD in place and making sure that technically all the systems are in a good place so that we can move things. And then I would move a subset of people to an organization, Dan, like you're talking about, a system or a solution, and say, we're going to try it here first. We're going to move people around, but now we have the technical underpinnings to do it. And at the same time, also get at least that part of the org have the funding change. But it'd have to be very intentional, thinking about what are the solutions that we are bringing, how are we going to fund that one solution and ring fence it off from the other stuff, and do we have the technical underpinnings and capabilities to pull this off? I think all of them have to come together.
It's funny because you are so talking like an ecosystem innovator at this point. When we look at what do you need to have for an ecosystem to work, there are 6 distinct types of things. The first is leadership, direction, and energy. There has to be a compelling message and drive for change. If the people don't believe that the boss wants this to happen, it's not going to happen. So there has to be that John F. Kennedy moonshot, we're off to, do something big and bold. That's the first thing. then, Dan, what you were saying about you've got to have a view of the end state vision. If we're talking about changing lots of interconnected pieces, if we don't tell people how all those pieces fit together and why they're, being moved around, you're never going to be able to get to that destination. It's just going to be whack-a-mole. The third thing then is, and you brought this up, you need agile money. The money has to be as agile as the rest of the organization. So governance needs to change. Fourth is you need flexibility in architecture. And so like your idea of CI/CD, make sure that the technology can move, but also make sure that the rest of the business organization can move. Make sure that you can do partnerships agility. Nobody talks about legal being a place where you could really be more agile, but partnerships go through legal. How do you get legal to have APIs on their contracts? And then you have the actual practice of doing all of this. And then finally, which I think each of you has hit on, is there's culture. So this combination of 6 things all need to be in place. And I think, one of the worst things that early stage Agile did was it convinced us that Pareto wasn't an idiot. And, the Pareto principle that basically says there's an 80-20 rule. If you do the 20% that's the best thing, that's the most valuable, you get 80% of the value. That's not the way it works with systems. You either deliver the whole system, all the parts are there, they all work together, or you're going to fail. And so people who grew up in a Pareto principle, well, all we've got budget for this time is the new funding model, they just drive the bus off the cliff.
So going back to the need, when you're talking about, the 6 components, 6 aspects of where organizations need to get to, if you haven't done any type of, agility transformation to this point, is the need just growing? Is it changing? What's that? You were talking about sort of the Mack truck and the big tech companies. At the end of the day, is it just responding to the marketplace? Is it finding value faster? What is that? What's that sort of common thread around that need for these organizations?
Let me jump in with a quick answer, and then I'll let others pile in. My sense is the Mack truck driver doesn't ask whether or not he's allowed to run over you. He is going to run over you just because he needs to, or because he doesn't care, or because you're insignificant to what he's doing. And as a result, the choice of whether you thrive and survive is yours. And the Mack truck driver is the proximate cause, but you're not really asking him. You're going to have to decide whether or not you're up for this big of a change.
Nice.
So the 6 pillars, right? I'm making up a story that there's the Mack truck driver doesn't care. You see him coming. There's something you need to do. Is there something that in kind of recent history has evolved as this is the new part that is needed now more than ever? And it's kind of, we did all that. We were Agile 3.0, transform the enterprise. Now there's a new thing. Or is it a bit of, hey, we've still got some runway with that 3.0 transforming the whole enterprise, right? Whether it's big bang or small piece or whatever the strategy is, plus a new thing.
Dan, do you want to jump in?
I don't know that I have a good answer to that. Just thinking about the question, I don't really think in terms of Agile 1.0 or 2.0, 3.0. Like I don't. So those terms to me, I just don't think that way. And I think that it kind of goes back to the thing about what do companies need and looking at what, like how often do they actually need to release, right? As a starting point. And starting from there, and in terms of these pillars, when I look at a lot of focus on the 6th one, the culture, and it seems to me that the culture is an amalgamation of the other things. right? And so a lot of us these days, I think in this, maybe this new wave, if you want to call it that, of Agile, as people think about culture and we need to change culture. I don't think you change culture directly. The article that I always point people
Right.
to is this HBR article from, like, I don't know, 7 years ago at this point, maybe 8, maybe a decade, called Culture is Not the Culprit, I think is the name of the article. And they've got like 3 CEOs, one of whom is Richard Anderson from Delta. And they talk about how they underwent change and they didn't attack culture directly. They attacked it by way of changing how people worked. And so I think for me, I don't necessarily see it as a wave so much as just an adaptation of understanding. People went in kind of gung-ho, like, we're going to go do all this stuff. We're going to scale it because that's the latest and greatest thing. And I think it settles in a place of recognizing that not everybody needs high levels of agility necessarily. And when you talked about the, Dan was talking about all the different parts coming together. Jeff Patton does this great thing in his class that I love, where he takes normally a $1 bill, but I was in a class with him in Paris, and he took this $5 bill because that's all he had, and he rips it up. And he's like, if I deliver just this part of the $5 bill, have I delivered you any value? Right? And the answer is no, because I can't do anything with the corner of a $5 bill. You need the whole thing. And so I think where we get stuck when we talk about agility is there's a lot of coaches out there who've actually never done it, I think, and who haven't seen some big companies. They're like, no, everything can be delivered in a small slice. Like, literally anything can be delivered in a small slice. I mean, maybe you can be like Airbus and go build, do program Maverick where they build a scale model of a plane and test it. Like, that's great, but you still actually haven't, you did learn something, but you haven't actually delivered the thing that somebody wants to buy. And so there is a certain amount of, you have to deliver the whole thing. And sometimes for some companies, what they're delivering is a fairly large thing. And I think that's okay. I think that's part of what being a giant company buys you. So I'm talking a lot, but I view that as, people talk about these 2 guys, the proverbial 2 guys in a garage. Well, for them, a $50 million bet is pretty big. For a company that has $10 billion a year in revenue, $50 million is not a huge bet. So I think that a big company can bet bigger if they have some data that suggests it's an okay thing to do. So anyway, lots of stuff in there. I don't know if I just rambled or answered the question.
I think you hit on a really interesting point, though. And this is where, when I talk about the changing need, I think it becomes really interesting and potentially helps explain a lot of things that have created friction in the past. If your job is to deliver a digital product, and the product is, and your question at the time is there demand for this product? Or does this design work? Then, little thin slices can be really effective at doing that. It's something that slices up well. If your job is to reinvent an insurance company so it can compete in a new market with different underwriting partners and completely different distribution channel, you need a whole bunch of pieces to all come together. And that kind of reinvention is not going to be sliceable in the same way that you slice the other thing. And so I think we have to get to the question of, what are we trying to do when we slice something? And for me, the answer is, when you're dealing with that bigger, more complex ecosystem, is say, this is the ecosystem we want to build. We've envisioned that whole big thing. Now, what are my big questions? Part of my questions might be, can I make the interfaces work with these new partners? Can I find a digital channel that will work and support the type of customers that I have? So you do slices that start to answer these questions by bringing together multiple pieces. But it's not the same thing as a digital product slice. It's a slice that involves legal and business and consumer, relations and all these things tied together, so that you're doing a slice of a system, meaning a business technology people system, rather than a slice of a digital product. It basically pushes Agile not as a series of practices into the business, but as an enterprise Lego exercise.
That sounds so. That sounds nearly impossible, right? I mean, talking about changing everybody and all those different functions all at once. And I'm curious, like, so I'll lay out kind of how I see an evolutionary process. So, well, there's a couple things that I had going through my head as you were talking. One is, where do you think you start? Because there's a big argument among agilists that I hear about you need to start with leadership, and others say, no, you can bottoms up it. And some people say you need bottoms up and leadership at the same time. But as I look at change, I really like a Kanban approach where you say, let's just start where we are. And if I were to map the flow through the system, and at first I get those technical practices in place and I make it possible for people to code in different environments safely across the system, or different systems across the company. And I have a flow of work and I have two areas that rub up against each other. What if I just make those two things rub less and be more flowy? And then I keep doing that piecemeal. Eventually I would get to flow across the whole organization. And so when I look at piecemealing it, I might approach it that way. And how does that line up with your notion of like a slice of the whole thing? Like, how would you implement that idea, that notion of a slice, I guess?
So I love this question because I think it gets to the underlying differences that exist at these different generations of Agile. Oftentimes I think there's a temptation to say Agile 1.0, whatever you conceive that to be, is just like a slightly smaller version of Agile 2.0, which is just a slightly smaller version of Agile 3.0. I think particularly in the case of this latest generation, it's a fundamentally different thing. It's still using principles of Agile, which say we test, learn, and adapt, that fundamental cycle of adaptation. But it's a different fundamental thing. So, Dan, when I hear you talk about change, I actually don't even think about change. I think about how do I create a business that can do this new thing. And so I almost position this as I have Lego blocks in the company. I've got a call center. I've got a technology team. I've got legal. I've got, these experts. And I get the leadership to basically say, go get this new business opportunity. And then you need a new role. And I think this is different. We've seen that there were new roles that emerged at every stage in Agile. Early Agile, you had, sort of the Scrum Master, the Agile ritual people that were part of teams. Then you had the Agile coach, the lean coach. Eventually, you got the product manager, the product owner. And each of these, dealt with a different aspect of, creating value with Agile. The innovation choreographer is really about how do I put together my Lego blocks in new ways. And they look across the entire organization and say, I'm going to need to work with technology around this issue. I'm going to need to work with new partners on this. And so they become sort of the person who weaves together this entire solution. When you've got that person in place, then you can make all the other structural changes to enable it. It's a much different kind of thing. And in some ways, it's easier because when you're changing people, you're basically saying you have a practice that you're comfortable with that has served you well for years and years. And now we want you to change it. And we're going to kind of whisper that you're an idiot if you don't do what we say you should. Whereas when you're reinventing and creating a new business opportunity, everybody knows why you're changing. It's because we're going to go after this new business opportunity and put together our new Lego blocks. And we've got this choreographer to help us make it possible and the leader who's going to drive us forward.
Yeah, I've seen cases very recently where it's more than whispered that, you're an idiot and everything you did is wrong. And that does not work so well. It doesn't work so well. But I think there still is an element of Right? People do. There is a need to change, but it isn't a change because we're bad. And to your point about waterfall being good intention, well-intentioned people's solution to a problem. Every problem that exists today, every process that is a problem today that gets in our way was some well-intentioned person's solution to a problem. And I think that's where it's important to honor the past and understand what problem they were solving, and seeing if we can solve it in a different way with new technology or new practice or new something. I think there's always a need for all of us to change, including me. And I have done so in my personal life, and it's something that I do, is look at how I can be better. And I think we all can do that without thinking that we are idiots or, doing wrong, bad things.
I think the thing that excites me about the ecosystem innovation stuff and the role of the choreographer is we don't actually use the word better very often. We don't use the word like, if you do this, you will be a better person, better effective, more effective, etc. We basically say we're making something new. And Janelle, you mentioned, one point in our earlier conversation that so often this discussion gets around these negative feelings and everything. It's exciting to build something new. That's why startups are such great places to work. Why not have that energy of creative change and opportunity and grasping at new possibilities in the world in a big established organization? There's no reason that just because you're big, you can't possibly have that excitement of creative change.
Question, after listening to this flow, talking about weaving into an entire solution. And, once again, the last few weeks I stumbled. Well, okay, I didn't stumble. It kind of whacked me in the face. And that is this discussion about developer productivity. It's like the time honored, okay, and maybe long ago it wasn't a developer, it was targeted at someone else who's making widgets, if you will. And so and I'll ask Mr. Moody first, just because we're trying to balance here. I could see like that article from large consulting organization that published that and, caused all kinds of clickbait and, discussion again. Like that could be seen in an organization as a distraction from all the things you were just talking about. So it could be one of, I don't know how many hundreds of distractions that a corporation or a director or a decision maker experiences in a year just by being out in the world trying to improve themselves by reading things. And so there's part of it is the distraction element of it. And then the other part, I think, might be a mental model of still wanting to, like, how can we be more predictable? Like, if I only knew who was the leaker and like the leaker must be bad and must be ditched or whatever. So what do you think about that, those things that just time honored pop up as we're trying to learn from mistakes and change a company?
Yeah, I think that discussion of developer productivity is really interesting. I personally don't believe that you can measure developer productivity because I think that productivity is output per unit time, and I actually don't care about output with developers. And I think that that's really easy to measure when you're rolling a Model T off an assembly line. I changed something, and I had been producing 5 Model Ts an hour, and then I produced 6. Like that's easy to measure. But when lines of codes are terrible terrible measures of productivity, and so how do you measure? Like, what are you talking about productivity? I say you just throw it out altogether. And I think that OKRs, they've become a buzzword. I don't think people understand how to implement them yet. I think OKRs done well are the democratization of all of that gets you to what you're looking to get. Meaning, if we're setting goals, and we are now, we have a seat at the table, and we have set goals that matter about outcomes, not just output. and we start delivering against those teams, they're going to know who's slowing them down. This is not a mystery. Every team knows it. And if they're accountable to goals and they're really putting up numbers against goals, they'll know who's slowing them down. Like, that's not going to be a surprise. And if you empower, truly empower, and you give teams the ability to sort of boot people off the island, or give lower level managers ability to, move people around, do what they need to do, I think you can solve those problems of how productive are people being. And we start looking at at outcomes, or even impact in the vernacular of output, outcomes, impact. And that's where I think you need to go with high levels of trust. The problem is that those high levels of trust don't exist today. And a lot of managers who are at the top today, they were not raised that way. And so their mental model of how I get results is by, twisting the vice on people and really cramping down and saying, I'm going to watch you and I'm going to make sure you're getting stuff done. It's the wrong mental model. So I think there's a lot to be done to get there, but I think that's the answer. I think how do we get to that in an appropriate way, I think, is the sticky wicket where people need help.
So I have a thought on that sticky wicket. I think, to your point, Dan, one of the most frustrating examples I ever had as I was working with an organization that was trying to do this next generation agile transformation, really repositioning the organization for a radically changed market, etc. And we got everybody on board. Even the CEO was just a strong voice, was down amongst the team telling them. And then one day, he didn't think the screens were being designed quickly enough. So he swooped in with all the UX people and started telling them where to move boxes around on the screen. And it was like this level of detail, command and control. I'm going to tell you what the right answer is. And he broke everything because everybody now saw what the CEO really believed, So I think there's a lot to that whole, you have to have consistency of message, etc. I also think, though, that part of the fault is ours. So we go from something very concrete, productivity, we've got burn down rate, we've got, stories per whatever. And then we substitute it with something called outcomes, which, as you mentioned, people don't, even after years, don't quite know what those are. And impact, what the heck is that? This is where, when you've got a choreographer who's creating these thin slices of system building, you can actually say, here are the 3 big questions we need to answer this time. And so your outcomes now become, did I answer those 3 big questions? Or here's the capacity or the capability we need to build. And so you design your thin slices with the outcomes built into the thin slice. And I think giving people a more concrete step to take up to really makes it possible to do a better job of getting everybody on board with this, because it doesn't feel like you're trading good concrete measures for marshmallows in a bag.
I agree. I think that's largely how it's presented. And I also think there's a certain level of people not quite understanding when they're trying to help companies with it. But if we can get away from how many widgets did I produce to did I actually move something that mattered? So what I see executives care about, they want to say, I want this project, I want that project, I want that project. They actually don't give one iota about the projects. They could be 3 completely different things. They actually do not care about the project. What they care about is moving the stock price, which is I'm not going to get to from those things. But there is some intermediary step. And if we can show them, and there are tools out there that are being developed these days, there are things that you can say, if you can show when this thing moves, it moves this, and it moves this, and it gets this thing you care about. And if we can show them that chain very effectively and then say, we're going to move this thing because we're hypothesizing that moving this thing moves this. And so all of our action, you're going to see movement in that. And if we're doing a good job moving that, we're doing what you want. I think that's where you start building in the trust, is showing from that level of outcome to impact. And if the words confuse people, we can just say, we're changing this low level thing because it ties to this thing eventually. But focusing on that versus I've delivered you 3 things, because the 3 things, like I said, I honestly think they just don't care. They want the outcome.
Well, they want something they can measure. They want a hammer they can hit with, a nail they can hit with their hammer. But I think we still can give them something that's a little bit less nebulous than stock price. And this is where I think, actually putting the connection between any project and improvement in stock price is almost impossible. Yes, there may actually be a business connection there, but who can possibly make that work? And it's not going to resonate with the CEO. If we can put in an intermediate step, though, and say, here's the part of the system we're building, the opportunity system, then I think we're in a much better place to say, okay, we're doing this thing and it has an outcome that's tied to a business strategy, but it's not something so, ethereal as, net promoter score or, stock price or something like that.
Well, I think you and I are saying the same thing. I think we're in violent agreement, because that's exactly what I mean is first, companies need to have a strategy. I keep referring people to Roger Martin's "A Plan Is Not a Strategy," a fabulous, I want to say it's a 5-minute video, because everyone thinks a plan is a strategy. It is not. And so first, having a strategy is important. And OKRs are also not a strategy. That's also, people think, oh, the outcome is the strategy. It is not. It is a measure. So if we can get to the chain of measurements that get to the thing that we care about ultimately, and we can hit the lower level intermediary thing, and there could be multiple levels. I think that's the important part. And if it's all aligned to a strategy, I think showing how that all ties together and showing that we're hitting a piece of the system, I think that's the message, right?
So let me do one more little pile on here so that we can get in even more violently agreement. I think there's a difference between strategy and vision.
Yes.
When I think about, for me, an ecosystem vision is, here's how all the pieces fit together. This is the business we're creating. This new business is going to have these partners with these technical capabilities. They're all going to fit together in this way. That's not strategy like in classic, McKinsey and Company, we've got a strategy to go after this part of the marketplace, etc. It's a architectural vision of what you're trying to build. And for me, that, when you insert that in there, then you get, the concrete sort of anchors for a lot of the other stuff that we've been agreeing on.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I like Roger Martin's definition, right? A strategy is, where do we play and how do we win?
Yeah, and I don't like that.
That is the strategy.
I don't like that.
Okay.
No,
I love it. So we'll disagree on that. We'll violently disagree on that point.
Well, in truth, I don't mind that. I actually do agree that that's a strategy. So where are we going to play and how are we going to win? Then you need a vision, which basically says, okay, you've decided you're going to play in rugby and you're going to win by being a fullback. I don't really know much about rugby, so hopefully I haven't gotten myself too far off here. But basically, I'm going to play this sport in this position. Now you've actually got to have a vision for how you're going to do that. That's that vision of, here's all the pieces I'm going to put in place so that I can fulfill that strategy. That's the piece that most people seem to miss.
I think again, I would say that I agree, and that we're still in violent agreement, because I say I like that. I like his definition of strategy. I agree that you need a vision. It is different than strategy, and then you need a plan. And you need and then you need a way to measure it, to make sure that you're actually on target with your plan. You need a way to course correct on that plan. And all of those things are up for review and change. They are not static things that happen and you never look at them again. So provided we have all those pieces, and that we're truly aligned on those things. No daylight between senior leaders, because we know when there's daylight between them, it becomes unwinnable battles at the lower levels. There needs to be absolute violent agreement and complete alignment on those things at the senior levels. And then we can move forward, and we have to be willing to change them. And more than anything, willing to get in front of the company and saying, you know what, we thought this and we've learned that's not true. Or we thought this and, hey, we made a mistake. Because too often we double down because we want to be seen as infallible leaders. And I see this so often where they're unwilling to say, yep, we made a mistake. That wasn't the right thing. Or, hey, we learned something. We're going to change. They just make it like they never want to go out and say that. And they want to make it seem like, oh, we were right. And we're also going to do this other thing. But we're not going to say that we made a mistake. And I think that's detrimental.
I think, when you start injecting these new layers that we've been talking about, like here's strategy up here with where you want to aim towards. Then you have your vision of here's how we think we're going to put all the pieces together. And then you have your thin slices of here's how we're going to go answer questions and build capabilities. You're absolutely right. We got to be able to change at all three of those levels. You got to be able to admit that there's, new learning at all those levels. But it also allows you to kind of not have to change some of the higher levels up if you're learning things at the lower levels. And I think giving more steps at which to learn, more layers at which to learn, can get around some of that challenge of like, oh, I can't admit that my strategy was wrong because, that's my whole job.
So to put this into picking up on the theme of violence, if we were to look at the mid-1970s Philadelphia Flyers, their vision was to build a team that would physically clobber any other club in the league to win. And the strategy was to go out there and hit and degrade the physical capability of the opposing team. And we measured that with wins and ultimately a Stanley Cup, to put it in a overly simplified example.
Yeah.
Yes, but now, Brandon, let me challenge you. So, yes, that was the strategy. Beat the living daylights out of other teams. But they actually did that through thin slices of here's the new draft picks that they're having. Here's the trades that they're doing. And so at each point they're saying, all right, we needed some new guys, on defense. Here's who we've got. Let's see how that's working. We adjust the other aspects. They're still taking that big vision, saying, here's the pieces we need, and then moving the thin slices in. And I think actually it's a great example of, you could do that with an insurance company that's trying to move into a new market. Instead of looking for guys on defense, you're looking for partners in underwriting.
Right.
Oh, we
So
keep talking about underwriting. I was an underwriter of life insurance for 5.5 years. Back in the day when you read handwritten medical records, and you'd have to, you can't read a certain word and you're pretty sure it matters for the coverage this person's looking for, walking around to other people in the cube farm, trying to say, what is this word? We think it says heart attack or MI or whatever it is, but we're not sure. And we end up having to contact the doctor. I'm just saying, you're reminding me of days in the past of underwriting where it's just lots of reading of medical and financial records. And it was turning digital as I left. So I never got to experience the thing of having everything on your screen versus waiting for the facts to come through of the faded out handwritten medical records from the psychiatrist.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find interesting about that kind of scenario is the digital organizations figured out a way to solve the problem, right? They did all this thing. Now they're going to reimagine how their ecosystems all fit together. And they may actually have to solve some of those same problems that were long solved again. And this is where I think you can get the underestimating how much it's going to take to do some of these new things to create that enterprise flexibility. Because, oh, gee, we haven't had to worry about that for 30 years, 20 years.
They're very insightful.
So it's something that has become present for me is, and I've seen this before because we talk about, and I think there's examples of, hey, we're going to do this agile thing over here, and you guys are going to get a new office space, and there's new ways of working. So you get within a big organization a very different micro culture all of a sudden. And then the strategy for a lot of enterprise transformations was to create that, put it on a pedestal as social proof, and then get the rest of the company to transform in that direction. And my question is that still, when we think about that vertical slice, the kind of reworking an ecosystem, is that still then the strategy in that play of, hey, if we're going to start somewhere, kind of find the one vertical slice and then bring the rest of the company over, or does it work a little differently?
So my experience with the vertical slice is that it has the same advantage of social evidence in the sense that, like, we pursued this new business opportunity and we got it and we're making money and, it all actually worked and the world didn't end. That has real value, but it's not the same kind of thing. It's not, in the sense of once people see it, oh, now we're going to have stand-ups and, et cetera. It's a bigger set of changes. So yes, social value, but not necessarily something that can just be organically adopted across the organization. Dan, how about,
Right.
what's your sense?
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree. I think you're spot on.
So being mindful of time, we do want to honor our time box and the commitment you made. Uh, what I think would be helpful if I was listening to this conversation, which has been fantastic, by the way. I mean, I've loved every moment of the violent agreement or disagreement. If you are out there and you're thinking, okay, so here's what is coming next. Here's what organizations will need help with. How can I prepare myself to have the type of skills or knowledge that's relevant in that space? So if you were thinking, hey, where can I learn something, pick something up that somebody would say, yes, I need that capability. Come on over here and help me. What would you say are like maybe the top three things that people should consider picking up?
Dan, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, a big a big unlock for me personally has been understanding more about what some people call as professional coaching, and that creates a whole stir on LinkedIn and other places about life coaches used in derisive terms. So, but so I took this class with Simon Powers out of the UK, and he talked about how for him professional coaching was like there's a window and he peered outside of it. This is learning about professional coaching and a whole new world appears. Same experience for me in terms of how I help companies adapt to change and to change themselves and to get better results. It helps them to, you have the tools to help them unlock what's blocking them. And so I have found that to be hugely valuable. And I think that skill is necessary. It does not mean that you go in and you talk fluffy butterflies or that you're a therapist. That's not your thing. I personally was turned off from it early on because I witnessed people at the company that we both worked at where people were getting into that, and I saw cases where at clients people were doing what was damn near therapy, and had people in tears and really bad stuff to happen as a result of interactions with your team. And so I was scared away from it, but having done it, I see the value there. So I think that skill is very important to be able to understand people better, and to be able to truly meet people where they are and understand evolutionary change to get people to a better place. So I think that having those skills are hugely valuable. I think systems thinking, like true systems thinking of being able to look at things that are cropping up and understanding all the interlinking parts throughout the system that are causing that, and to be able to expose those in a way that they can be addressed, I think is also hugely important. So I think understanding something about humans and human change understanding systems thinking and how to apply it to problems in the workplace, and use that coaching stance to be the mirror and to be able to actually make a difference is important. I don't know if that was three, but those, to me, those two things going hand in hand make a huge difference. And I think those capabilities are, and that's my list.
Awesome. Thank you. Dan McClure, how about you?
I think I'm going to also say systems thinking, but really a different version of systems thinking. So I think there's a systems thinking that's tied to like root cause analysis, problem solving in the sense of how do we make this system better? And then I think there's a systems thinking around ecosystem innovation, where it's how do we create new systems? How do we build a new system that can do something that isn't possible today? And so this is where you're basically architecting new businesses, new opportunities, new possibilities. And I think both of these models of system thinking have real value. But the second one, the one that I'm talking about, is the one that's best positioned to get you out of the way of the Mack truck. And so part of what I think I would recommend for folks, if they're just like wanting to get into something to read, is read about systems that are being challenged and that are being reimagined and that are being invented. I'd say a third of the books behind me are about, systems that are being twisted and moved into new forms, etc. And so you've got this, begin to get inspired about what you can do. The second thing then I think would be recognize that there's a new role, this choreographer role, who thinks about this stuff, who shapes these systems, who navigates this change. It's still an emerging role in the sense that it is not widely named and not widely recognized. But even over the last year, we've seen more and more job listings pop up that basically are about this role, about connecting things and how you shape things. And then finally, it's, you got to start getting used to the idea that Agile is more than an IT thing, and see how you see Agile as an entire enterprise, rebuilding the enterprise with Lego blocks. And all of those things are sufficiently cutting edge right now that you're going to have to poke around and look for stuff.
Excellent. Thank you. So this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate the wisdom and the dialogue today, the agreement, the disagreement, and everything in between. It's been really just fun for me. I'm sure it has been for Janelle. Janelle, did you want to add any last words?
I do not. I just want to know how our audience can contact and find our distinguished guests.
So I'm at innovationecosystem.com, and you'll also be able to find and contact us by walking down to your local Barnes & Noble come February, because we will have a new book out, Doing Bigger Things, which is all around this ecosystem innovation, choreographer change. So watch for us on Amazon or your local 20th century bookstore.
Thank you.
And I'm not cool enough to have a book or a website, although I do have a domain. So you can always email me at dan@danielrmoody.com, which strangely is, when it's all lowercase, people miss the R because the R almost looks like part of the M, so they'll just do Daniel Moody. So Daniel, I do it caps now, danielrmoody.com. So that's me, or LinkedIn. I spend most of my time on there these days. I kind of got rid of all my other socials, so that's where I hang out and post.
Excellent. Well, Dan McClure, Dan Moody, thanks so much for joining us for the next Horizon in Agility. This will be hosted on YouTube shortly, so we'll let you know when it's about to go live. But otherwise, again, thank you so much. It's just been a lot of fun, and of course, we invite anybody who has engaged with this or listened to this to comment, reach out, contact. We don't want to just broadcast. We want the feedback. We want to start the dialogue to see where this goes. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Brandon, Janelle.
Thank you.